Today is day 332 of the October 7th war. The people of Israel continue to mourn the 6 hostages that Hamas executed a few days ago. The 6 murdered hostages were shot multiple times from close range, execution style. It was another reminder that Hamas is an enemy of humanity, a barbaric terrorist organization with no regard for human life. We are now in a period of intense diplomatic activity that could determine the course of the October 7th war. Many world leaders issued statements after news broke that Hamas executed 6 hostages. I want you to listen closely to the statements because there's a common theme to all of them. Here are 3 examples of statements. US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said, "Hamas will be held accountable and we must swiftly conclude a deal to secure the release of the remaining hostages." The Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, said, "Hamas must release all hostages, lay down its arms, and have no future in the governance of Gaza. Leaders must reach a deal to bring the rest of the hostages home and end the violence." The Foreign Minister of the United Kingdom, David Lammy, said, "Hamas must release all the hostages immediately, and all sides must accept the deal on the table to end this war." There is the demand of Hamas to release the hostages. There's the statement that Hamas must be held accountable, and there is also a call to reach a deal. Do you see the problem? There is a contradiction in these statements. What is the contradiction between demanding that Hamas be held accountable and calling for a deal? Hamas will only accept a deal if it means that Hamas can avoid accountability. That's why we're stuck. It's why the war that Hamas started on October 7th is continuing. I want to tell you something that frustrates me. World leaders are saying Hamas must release the hostages, but none are saying what the consequences will be if Hamas does not release the hostages. Must needs to be followed by an or else it is meaningless. What might or else mean? Here's an idea. Hamas is supported by Qatar, Turkey, Iran, and others. The US and its allies should apply maximum pressure to Hamas's supporters so that they will pressure Hamas to let the hostages go now. Hamas is not facing enough pressure. Remember, Hamas executed an American citizen, Hirsch Goldberg Pollen, just after his parents addressed the conference of a US political party. Hamas executed an American hostage while negotiations are ongoing in Qatar. That's what Hamas thinks of American threats right now. Hamas is not afraid of its global standing. Hamas leaders are living a comfortable life in luxury villas in Qatar, down the street from a major US airbase. Hamas is welcome in Qatar, a non-NATO ally, and the host of the last World Cup. Hamas is welcome in Turkey, a member of NATO. It was in Turkey where Hamas leader Khalid Mashal issued his call for more suicide bombings. Hamas has an interesting relationship with Egypt, a major recipient of US military aid. It was through Egypt that Hamas smuggled massive amounts of weapons into Gaza under the Philadelphia corridor. And then there's Iran, a huge supporter of Hamas and the entire ring of fire surrounding Israel. Iran has enjoyed massive US sanctions relief. Hamas's enablers have points that expose them to pressure from the whole world. Tell your leaders, pressure Hamas's partners to pressure Hamas. Put Hamas's supporters under maximum pressure. It should not be possible for a country to be a NATO ally and also support Hamas. Do you agree? I want all of my viewers, everyone watching today, to be on guard against contradictions. Some world leaders are calling for Hamas to lay down its arms and have no future running Gaza, but they also demand that Israel agree to leave Hamas armed and running Gaza. Some world leaders are calling to free hostages now by signing a deal that would not free them now. Let's not forget how we got here, and let's be clear of what is required. Hamas must be forced to release the hostages now, and Hamas cannot be allowed to rearm and take more hostages again tomorrow. Let's take some questions from our audience watching live on social media, YouTube, Instagram, X, LinkedIn, wherever you're watching. We are gathering questions, and I hope to answer a few of them now.
Our first question today comes from Karen Gilkarov, who asks, are we still going to negotiate with Hamas, knowing full well that it will never work?
Israel is open to finding ways to achieve the aims of the October 7th war that Hamas started. Let me repeat what the aims of this war are. The first is the destruction of Hamas's military and government capabilities in Gaza. The second is the safe return of all of the hostages that Hamas continues to hold and has held for 11 months. And the third aim of the war is that Hamas will never be able to carry out another October 7th massacre. These are the aims of the war. There are military ways of achieving these objectives, and there are diplomatic ways of achieving these objectives, and Israel is pursuing both of these tracks in parallel. For months, Israel has been sending negotiators to Cairo, to Doha and Qatar, to see if there is a way to come to a deal. Until this point, there has not been a deal. There have been many reports about what might be in the way, but what I've attempted to point out is the big picture, which is the kind of deal that Israel is seeking, is a deal that for Hamas would be unacceptable. Israel wants to hold Hamas accountable for the crimes that it committed on October 7th and ensure that Hamas will never be allowed to carry out another massacre. Hamas, of course, has not said yes to such a deal at this time, which is, of course, one of the reasons why we need more pressure on Hamas's backers. And ultimately, Hamas is using the hostages as insurance. It uses the hostages so that it can continue its war. If Hamas wasn't holding the hostages, Hamas leaders would be in trouble. So I don't envy the Prime Minister of Israel or any of the negotiators who are trying to find a way to achieve the objectives of the war and bring the hostages home. We must be open to any and all avenues with our partners in the region. This includes working with Egypt. It includes communicating with Qatar. It includes sending messages to Turkey. But in the meantime, the October 7th war that Hamas started is continuing. Hamas continues to fight in Gaza. It continues to fire rockets. It continues to fire anti-tank missiles. It continues to fire mortars. So on the one hand, the war is continuing. And in parallel, the diplomatic track is very active, especially this week.
Our next question comes from EMJ on YouTube, who asks, why do you and other pro-Israel channels use the term executed? It lends Hamas actions legitimacy. Why don't you call it murder? They murdered the hostages. They didn't execute them.
Hamas certainly murdered the hostages, as it murdered 1,200 people on October 7th when it invaded Israel. But in particular, these hostages, we know they were alive. They were in the tunnels, and Hamas decided to murder them. This word is correct. I choose to use the word executed because of the manner in which the murder took place. I have no problem using the word murder, executed, killed. Hamas, in this case, behaved in a manner like ISIS, shooting people in the head. It's a barbaric terrorist organization. I think the word execute is one level above murder. Murder sounds like it could be also an everyday crime, but what Hamas done is even worse than that. Above first-degree murder, the conscious decision to execute hostages that it has held in barbaric conditions since October the 7th, murdered, executed, choose the word you like.
Our next question comes from Sammy on YouTube, who asks, are hostage body recovery operations rescue operations or recovery? What should we call them? Aren't we rescuing the bodies from the hands of Hamas?
Well, I love these questions about word choice because it's something that I think about a lot as I'm writing, whether this daily briefing or my own tweets. Again, I don't have a qualms with a rescue, recovered, retrieved. There may be different words used in Hebrew, but when I hear the word rescue, I'm thinking of the standard use of the word rescue, which is that someone was in trouble and they were saved. Unfortunately, for many of the hostages, it is too late to save them. What we do owe them and their families is a proper funeral in Israel and some modicum of closure. So whether the bodies are rescued, retrieved, brought back into Israel, we're speaking about the same thing. Personally, I'm less inclined to use rescue unless they are brought out alive, because that to me is what the word rescue means. But in any case, we are bringing them home. We want all of them home. Every hostage that Hamas seized on October 7th, whether dead or alive, we want them home.
The next question comes from Linda_Lita_Lou on Instagram, who asks, why hasn't Israel finished all operations in Gaza until now and freed all the hostages?
Well, Israel is facing an enemy that prepared for this war for years. The tunnel infrastructure that Hamas dug in Gaza is unbelievable, and I think the truth is barely out and not widely understood about the military infrastructure that Hamas possessed in Gaza, the ability to move underground undetected so that its fighters could move from place to place, the ability to store weapons, the ability to have communications undetected underground. So Hamas, first of all, has built this massive underground city or state in Gaza. And above that, even more military infrastructure in residential buildings, schools, hospitals, mosques, and so on. The work that is required to fight an urban warfare against Hamas is slow and methodical, but it is ongoing. And again, I emphasize the objectives of the war from Israel's prime minister, as he stated from the beginning, the destruction of Hamas's military and government capabilities, the safe return of all the hostages, and ensuring that October 7th massacre will never happen again. Now, while Israel is carrying out this war, it is adhering to the Geneva Conventions, to which it is a signatory. The Geneva Conventions require that an army distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. And Israel is attempting to do this as best as it can, given the circumstances of Hamas's military buildup. But the fact that Israel does distinguish between combatants and non-combatants is part of the reason that this war is slow and methodical. And at the same time, the Israeli military does not want to endanger the hostages. We want to bring them home safely. So there are many different tracks and angles to this very complicated war. I'm not sure there's been a more complicated war in the history of warfare, where one side has had its people taken deep inside the military infrastructure of the other side, held hostage, while that side is using its military infrastructure in densely populated areas to attack the other side. We're talking about a distance of only a few football fields that separate Gaza from Israel. I would like this war to be over as quickly as possible. I want to see all the hostages home, and I want to see Hamas held accountable. It's going to take time.
Our next question comes from GoCarry5 on Instagram, who asks, should we submit and leave the Philadelphia corridor?
Well, this is the million-dollar question, and there are two answers that the Israeli people are debating. One of them is no, and one of them is yes. The no is easy to understand. Of course, we should not leave the Philadelphia corridor. We should not leave this narrow strip of territory that separates Egypt from the Gaza Strip, because it is through this territory, both from smuggling above ground and deep underground in tunnels, that Hamas has been able to arm itself through smuggling networks from Egypt. So the massive weapons arsenal that Hamas had on October 7th, firing thousands of rockets just on October 7th, it's not only domestic production, but supplies and ammunition and material is coming through this corridor. So if Israel's military objective, if its political objective is that October 7th massacre can never happen again, that Hamas can never be allowed to rearm, then of course the Israel Defense Forces needs to remain on this territory. Okay? This is an intense debate within Israel right now, because you have voices that have said it may be possible to leave this corridor so that we can have a hostage release agreement. This is the one sticking point between Israel and the Hamas negotiators, according to the reports that I'm reading. We don't know exactly what's true. We don't know what deal is actually on the table. We don't know what's being asked of Israel. But if Israel is being open to the possibility of a deal, it also means that there, by definition, need to be some Israeli concessions, and that may involve the way that the IDF is deployed in Gaza for a limited time or a permanent time, and it also involves the amount of prisoners Hamas prisoners, terrorists that are going to be released from Israeli prison. So there are many factors to a decision, and that's why there cannot be a simple yes or no, but it's important that you, as the viewers, as people interested in Israel, understand the complexity of the subject and the debate within Israel on this very question you asked.
Last question today has been asked by a number of viewers, but is best summed up by Peter9253's question from Instagram, who asks, how could Israel allow this complex underground terror complex to be built?
Yes, thank you, Peter, for this question. Your question and about 100 others are questions that the people of Israel are asking themselves, and there's going to be one real way that these questions are answered, and that's through an official commission of inquiry. Much like after the 9/11 attacks in the United States had an official 9/11 commission of inquiry. There was testimony, there were judges, and a final report was produced that answered a lot of the questions about how this happened. Eventually, the same protocol process will happen within Israel, where questions are answered by the relevant authorities. In the meantime, the war goes on. We are still fighting a war. Hamas is still holding hostages. Hamas is still planning attacks, and Hamas is still promising to carry out more attacks. So while we have many questions about the past, we must be focused on the present and also the future. That's all the time we have for questions during the live. I want to encourage everyone to follow my personal accounts on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Paul Rubens, Paulrubens. If you have a specific question that I wasn't able to answer, try to DM me and I'll answer you there. Please also follow me on Instagram. You will see the reels that I'm posting at Ruby Guides Israel, RUBY Guides Israel. And of course, follow the Israeli Citizen Spokespersons Office on all of the platforms. We're posting great content, so keep an eye on that. Thank you all for watching. We are live every day, Sunday to Thursday, 3 p.m. Israel time, 8 a.m. Eastern. Have a wonderful day.